Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Second City. Tonight, we're very pleased to bring you scenes from the Second City directly here in Chicago in the Cabaret nightclub into your theater in the home. These scenes were originally improvised by actors, both on ideas that they had and lines that they made up as they went along, and from suggestions from the audience. Audiences such as you see here tonight at the Second City.
The germ of Second City was the Playwrights Theater at the University of Chicago. This is in the 50s when modern jazz was emerging. I think they kind of were interested in evolving the theatrical equivalent of jazz, which became improvisational comedy on the stage.
It came out of two things. It came out of the University of Chicago, where there was a confluence of talent: Ed Asner, Mike Nichols, Elaine May, Paul Sills, and so forth, and all motivated by Viola Spolin, who was Paul Sills' mother, and written a book about improvisation.
It was actually written for children, but everyone started using it to teach adults these basic theater techniques and to give everyone a similarly structured approach to making improvisation, so it wasn't just chaos and ad-libbing on stage. People had specific intentions and kind of a rule structure.
And then there was the times. It was a time when there's a repression in the United States. Senator McCarthy and his anti-communist campaign, and people were afraid to say anything. And so as a reaction formation, there were people like Lenny Bruce, Dick Gregory, and ourselves doing topical humor for the first time in a long time. And it was very, very exciting for people. It was like sex, you know. Go on stage and say Eisenhower.
From Playwrights Theater at University of Chicago, they evolved a sketch comedy, improv sketch comedy group called The Compass, which went out. And Mike Nichols and Elaine May were in these groups in the early days, and Severin Darden, who was terrific, and Barbara Harris, and Mina Kolb, and all these great people. And they got the idea of doing it as a commercial theater. I think they put together a small amount of money, bought enough bentwood chairs, built a bare stage above a Chinese laundry, and started Second City in 1960 with Paul Sills as the first director, Bernie Solins, and Howard Alk as the producers.
Well, what made it essentially different, and still makes it different, is that it wasn't a group of jokes or wisecracks. It was behavior. We came from the theater. Most people nowadays come from television, but we came from the theater, which meant theater structures, theater acting, theater ideas, and above all, emphasizing behavior. It was not the humor of comment, it was the humor of behavior. And it also dealt with things outside of politics, like the power situation between bosses and workers, the school teacher, then the student, the everyday life treated topically. And I think that's what just differentiates it from stand-up, which is a manipulation. You know, I tell you a joke, you laugh. This was acting, with people behaving with each other, saying hello, and you're believing they were saying hello to each other.
I have a problem.
Oh, for heaven's sakes.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, why didn't you tell me before?
Well, I've been kind of working up to it, you know.
Oh.
My problem...
You should say anything that comes into your mind.
Well, I'm going to do it. My problem is I don't have a pad. That's it, and I was just wondering, since we're getting along so good, then, you know, maybe I could fall into your pad for a few days. You come, maybe I could fall into your pad
running
for a few days, and then
I'm
until I
not
go to
running.
Denver.
I'm just trying to visualize your problem. You're missing, you've lost, you just don't have a pad. For heaven's sake. I'll tell you, I live with my aunt. And
well, that's all right. We'll straighten her out, too.
Well, I think pre-1960s comedy belonged to the Las Vegas stand-up comedians and television comedy. You know, Milton Berle show and Sid Caesar and Steve Allen kind of dominated primetime comedy on TV, and the great stand-up comedy tradition. You know, most of them Jewish, old Borscht Belt comedians, with a joke structure. You know, based on "Take My Wife, Please" was the whole thing. And then the 60s, as the whole country started to wake up from the from the Eisenhower slumber after the Second World War, people like Lenny Bruce started finding their voice, and Mort Sahl, and comedy turned edgier and more political.
Well, there was a floor of beyond which you did not go. You did not tell jokes for their own sake. You did not use obscenities for their own sake. You did not use effects for their own sake. You always served the scene. And you acted at the top of your intelligence, at the top of your ability. And you assumed that the audience was at least as smart as you were, if not smarter.
Oh, you seem to forget there were a great many Kierkegaardian existentialists.
Oh, no. We have a left guard and a right guard. No Kierkegaard. As you can see on the blackboard here, I've outlined a football field. It's roughly 30 by 100 yards long.
Roughly, sir?
Oh, my diagram. Yes, it's a little off. On the field, it's 100 yards long.
Exactly.
Yes.
I can accept that.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. You're going to have to. All right, here we go. I've drawn some yard lines here, gentlemen. You'll see they're 5 yards apart.
Oh, excuse me, sir.
Yes, Pim.
Do those horizontal lines have some relationship to the treble and bass clef?
No, that's not a staff. I'm sorry to disappoint you.
Oh, I don't mind.
Oh, good. No, that's a football field. Of course, you wouldn't play on the blackboard. You play out of doors. Right. Let's take a hypothetical case here, gentlemen. Let's say you have the ball on the 47-yard line here.
Oh, I beg your pardon, sir. Those things you keep referring to as lines.
Yes.
Those are not lines. If they were lines, they would go all the way out to the end of the universe and make the game very long and tedious.
Well, what are they?
They're line segments.
I can accept that. Fine.
The audience loves to watch the growth process before their very eyes. And that is really the Second City approach to improvisation. It's not free improvisation. So they like being part of the creative process. But the kind of improvisation that I am particularly addicted to is the kind that does not aim at creating material, that aims at creating a momentary, fragmentary experience that has some kind of a totality to it. It's kind of like fireworks, the most ephemeral of art forms. You know, once it's gone, baby. There's the after image for a few seconds. But nobody will ever see anything like it again.
We were getting known, yes. We had played Broadway and gotten good reviews, although we lasted only 2 months. And then we opened in New York in a small club and did well for a couple of years. So we began to be talked about.
New York critics picked up on the fact that something new was happening in comedy, and it was fashionable, which was, that's always a good thing when you're trying to start a business. And Second City was considered the home of improvisational comedy, and then other groups inspired by the same impulse and inspired by the success of Second City started performing, and the Proposition in Boston, the Committee in San Francisco, the Compass itself continued to tour a little bit.
And the reason is not that we were particularly brilliant, but we had found a way to do comedy that developed comedians. They did 8 shows a week. They made up their own material. After 3 or 4 years of that, dealing directly with the audience in comedic situations, you begin to know what you're doing. But not only that, you're learning that you're dependent on the other actor. And in fact, Hollywood directors tell me they always know a Second City actor because he reads the other people's parts as well as his own, and knows what's going on and knows how to act in an ensemble manner. And that's the result of this kind of work.
I grew up in Chicago, and I'd grown up in the kind of beatnik folk music coffee house atmosphere of the earlier 60s, and in fact was a guitar-playing beatnik singer. And but I didn't see Second City as a teenager. I used to go to the Gate of Horn, and I'd seen Lenny Bruce at the Gate of Horn and Mort Sahl, and music was kind of more my thing. But after college, I moved back to Chicago. This is in the late 60s, and I saw David Steinberg on stage at Second City with a very good cast. I thought very funny and really smart. And but I had the reaction that a lot of people have had who've come through Second City. I looked at them and thought, gee, I could do that. And because it seems so accessible, the stage at Second City is, you know, the audience is 2 feet away. Sometimes they literally put their feet on the stage.
We were invited to play at the Royal Alex, which was, I think, you know, we had done a legitimate venue before, but that was a large venue. And we were embraced by Toronto. They loved us. You had critics that loved us, and the audience loved us. And we came back another year, and then we decided, well, since we're so liked, we might as well try to make a go of it.
At one point, originally I'd left when the company was going to do a show in New York, and then at one point Bernie Sahlins put together a show for Toronto, which was done in a rented space, and which I guess was the precursor to the actual established Second City Theater that Andrew Alexander finally did. But that was kind of the beginning of us knowing that Canada was up there and was a potential market, and that we had brothers and sisters in comedy up there. And then when Andrew started the Second City Company as a franchise in Toronto, I met everybody. I think 1973 they came down. There was an exchange of casts. The Chicago cast went to Toronto. The Toronto cast came down, and that cast was Gilda Radner and John Candy. Eugene was in that company. Aykroyd was probably around, yeah. And Rosemary Radcliffe, I remember. And so I saw them work, and that's when I kind of understood that we had a common destiny in some way.
We had played a couple of years, and we were invited to be up there. Our first venture ended in disaster. We opened in the middle of a heat wave without air conditioning. And couldn't get people to sit there, couldn't get actors to sit there. So we sort of closed, but then Andrew came along, Andrew Alexander, and we opened at the Fire Hall under his producership. And we did very well.
At that time, I was working in the small theater world. I was Global Village Theater, which was on St. Nicholas Street, and then after that, I went to the St. Lawrence Center. And then actually it was after the St. Lawrence Center that I came to Chicago, and I had met Bernie and Joyce in Toronto because they were looking for a theater at that time. During that process, they actually opened. I moved down here, was working for a theater called the Ivanhoe, and one day at the bar here, Bernie had indicated that it looks like they were going to close the place, so we were able to do a very quick transaction. I moved back to Toronto, found the Fire Hall, and sort of went on a quest to reunite the cast, or most of the cast that had started on the other theater, which was Dan Aykroyd, Gilda Radner, Joe Flaherty, John Candy, Eugene Levy.
I think it did pretty well from the beginning. We had good casts. We brought Bill Murray up. We had good people from Toronto. Joe Flaherty up. We had Gilda, and we had Eugene Levy, and we had really good people.
There were a lot of small, 99-seat theaters starting up in new work, all original work. And then you had this phenomena of this group that did come from Hamilton: Eugene, Ivan Reitman, Dave Thomas, Paul Schaefer, Jane Eastwood, and Gilda Radner. Gilda was from Detroit, but they all ended up in Godspell. And so when it came for auditions for Second City, I mean, this whole group they kind of knew each other and had a working background together, ended up at all these auditions for Second City and became the nucleus of the first Second City Company. It was a very special time. It's in terms of that unique blend, group of talent. I don't think we've ever seen anything like it in terms of the stars that actually evolved out of that period.
Well, it seemed like from an international point of view, we were all kind of worshiping at the same altar, which included the great British comedy tradition, which for me started with the Goons, Peter Sellers and Spike Milligan, and then evolved into the establishment, Peter Cook and Dudley Moore, and their legitimate heirs, the Monty Python Company. So there was that tradition, which to me was the smartest thing going on, apart from whatever was happening in Second City. And when I finally hooked up with the Canadian comedy culture, somewhere in around 73 or 74. It was very interesting because I felt we all shared the same influences. But the Canadian school was informed by Canadian sensibility. And not unlike what we had in Chicago, Chicago being the second city, I think Canada both has the advantage and suffers from the complex of being the second nation on the continent. And it's from a comedic point of view, it's a privileged position to be in. It's hard for winners to do comedy. Comedy is inherently subversive. It's we represent the underdog, as comedy usually speaks for the lower classes. It's, you know, we attack the winners. So Second City, Second Nation was a fine fit.
Bernie had been asking me since from the moment we opened the theater up in March of 74, I think it was. Bernie had been saying, you know, we should do TV, we should do TV. And Bernie had some experience in England. He had done a few TV specials back in the 60s and was really, you know, encouraging me to sort of find a way to do television in Canada. And I said, no, Bernie, we can hardly keep the door open. And then Saturday Night Live emerged, and then I immediately said, oh, good, I'm going to have to do something about this. So in '75, it went on the air, and we had just opened. So very quickly we started losing those cast members, and in fact I was really concerned because we had just yet to really establish Second City in Toronto, and losing Dan and Gilda. Now I thought, oh my gosh, it's over with. Another network is going to think this is the new genre, and they would start looking again to pick off more Second City people.
Bernie said, well, Lauren's stealing all my cast. We're going to have our own show. So he goes to Canada and he puts together a very low-funded, I think it was like $3,000 an episode for the first shows. And they can actually do shows in Canada for $3,000 an episode. But you don't have sets, you don't have makeup, and you don't have anything really. You just go out there looking like an idiot.
Saturday Night Live did not come out as a big hit. I mean, it was a big media darling. I mean, I think the media loved it and embraced it right away. And late night was sort of an emerging phenomena as well. So in Canada, for sure, it wasn't like my phone was not ringing off the hook saying, you know, let's do the next Saturday Night Live. But, you know, I was able to sort of find a way to, you know, get the cast together and find a way to maybe develop our own television show on a local basis in Toronto.
No trouble casting at all because they were bright, they were theater experienced. I'll take a good actor every time over what people consider a funny person, because a good actor will get it and still be a good actor.
Bernie called and asked if I'd be interested in doing one show in Toronto. And they said who'd be involved. Sounded great. I went up to Toronto and we had, all I knew, I guess I was meeting Andrew for the first time, and John Candy was at the meeting, and everyone in the cast I think was at the meeting. Andrea and Catherine and Eugene and Dave Thomas and Joe Flaherty and me, and including Del Close and Sheldon Patinkin. Sheldon Patinkin had been directing Second City on the stage in the mid-'60s, and Del Close had kind of taken over and was the comedy mentor of the later years of Second City, and Del was a renowned kind of comedy genius. And we sat around kind of conceptualizing what a Second City television show might look like.
Well, if you ask 50 people, you get 50 answers. It came out of a meeting. I refused to take sides or even claim that was my idea.
I'll tell you exactly whose it was. It was Del Close's idea. The idea for the show. Well, all right, let's back up. What do you mean? Do you mean the idea to do a show like that? That came from Bernie.
Out of that meeting came the notion, there were about 8 of us, 10 of us at the meeting, that it should be that. And it was one of those additive ideas where people are adding to it in the meeting. So to claim ownership, I think, is a little ego trip.
How did it come about? I think it was my idea. You know, people ask that. It's evolved. It was like permutations of this, that, this, that. It started off with But Bernie Solins, who's not given enough credit on these things, incidentally, he's kind of pushed in the background, but he helped get the whole thing going along with Andrew Alexander.
Saturday Night was already out there and well established and in its first year. And we thought, well, we have no money, we have no network, we can't look that slick, we can't be like a network show. And we're coming from this, tiny TV station in Toronto in a not a major market, and maybe we should just look like a local television program.
I said I wanted to do TV parodies because on stage they were always the most fun to do, the most easily recognizable. Whenever we do a TV thing, the response was always great. So we used to talk about, back in Chicago, we'd say, geez, whenever we do TV parodies, they go over gangbusters and they're fun to do, and movies too, movie parodies. So we should do a show just doing parodies of television and movies.
That's what evolved, and people have been variously given credit for saying that the format would be like a programming day in a station. And I don't remember if we named the town Mellonville right then, but that's when we kind of came out of that meeting having agreed that that's what we would look like.
Don't touch that dial. Don't touch that one either. And stop touching yourself, because the Second City Television Network now begins its programming day with John Candy, Eugene Levy, Andrea Martin, Joseph O'Flaherty, Catherine O'Hara, Harold Ramis, and Dave Thomas as the Beaver.
So we decided to have it take place at a place called Mellonville, which was kind of, it could have been anywhere. It was just
It was just a place. Just a generic
just a place. Generic place, could be Canadian.
Mellonville in the Tri-City area.
Yes.
Right.
What was it? Duxburg,
Plattsburgh.
Plattsburgh, and Mellonville. I think that was the three cities. Those were good days.
I was in partnership with Len Stewart on a restaurant up in the north part of Toronto, and I borrowed $35,000 from Len. In fact, he invested it with another fellow by the name of Scott Baker, and that became the basis of sort of pulling the cast together and doing 7 television shows.
There was quite a range of experience and age. Dave Thomas was one of the younger members. Catherine was pretty young. And I felt I'd been around. I'd worked in New York, I'd worked in LA. I hadn't done a lot of TV, but I worked on public television. And and I'd been at the Lampoon, which was a very hard-edged, kind of cynical working environment. So Dave seemed, tremendous energy, very eager. Andrea had nice, really good theatrical experience and was a terrific performer. And everyone was smart and everyone was kind. That was kind of the hallmark. And what we heard from Saturday night was how competitive it was, real cutthroat atmosphere. You succeeded at other people's expense, which led people to wish for each other's failure, which was something we did not do.
Standards, working at the top of your intellect, things that would keep us from becoming a huge hit show and made us a totally respectable show with its own loyal audience like Python. And the sense that you had to do good work, that you weren't doing anything for succeeding, to succeed only, you were serving the show. It's very important. As an actor, you were serving the show. As a director, you're serving the show. As a producer, you're serving the show. You're not serving your ambition. You're not serving your bank account. You're serving the show. That was always there. Still is with Second City and was always there with SCTV.
I got to know everyone through their writing at the beginning, and everyone had kind of a different style and different ways of producing material. Some were real writers, others were great conceptualizers, but could not sit down and actually write a piece. So we helped each other. It's like helping each other with our homework, kind of.
There's another legacy, though, that has nothing to do with the work, but with the people. That you have people who are, You call up a Hollywood studio or a television studio, and the person at the other end is likely to be a Chicagoan or Torontonian who had something to do with the Second City, because they learn to do the work, and so they become directors, and they become writers, and they become actors, and they carry the thread. And I think that if there is a legacy, it's in the individuals who carry that notion of doing the work at the top of your skill, of doing the work at the top of your integrity, of serving the work. That's all there in the person of these people.